happy to answer questions or hear your conspiracy theory. No, I'm just kidding. Happy to answer questions. Or are there microphones for this? Does someone have a microphone?
We have. It's so crowded, Jeremy, that we ended up not setting up the microphone. It would be too hard for people to get over to the mic.
I think if you're webcasting it, you better use a microphone. Neo has one, right? I mean, if...
We could try, but if not, we might reduce to having a question shouted and you repeating them, okay?
Okay, but does that microphone work? All right. Well, we can just start with, let's just alternate. And because men always are the ones that aggressively raise their hands, let's make sure that we have gender balance in the room tonight. We'll come back to you next.
My question is, with the one strike that happened on what they said was a training camp or something like that, where do you perceive the failure was? Why do you think they did it?
Yeah. So you're asking about this bombing that there was the first strike that Obama authorized in Yemen against Al-Majla, this place Al-Majla, December 17th.
How did that happen?
I get your question.
You know what I'm saying?
So people understand. My understanding is that they had been fed this intelligence by the Yemeni government, and what I think may have happened there, and this is also based on other incidents where the Yemeni regime had a lot of pressure being put on it by the new administration, by Obama. Because JSOC and the CIA were saying, look, there's all these plots going on. Yemen needs to do more. So I think the White House was putting a lot of pressure on them to cooperate more with the United States in the fight against al-Qaeda inside of Yemen. And I think that the regime calculated that no one would actually care about that village because it's in the middle of nowhere. And they said, oh, this is a training camp. And the Yemeni government had done that before. In fact, they had the political opponents of the regime were killed in U.S. drone strikes because the Yemeni government said, oh, this person is an al-Qaeda leader, and it turns out they're a deputy governor of a province who's a political opponent of the regime and has nothing to do with al-Qaeda. This happens repeatedly. It also happens in Afghanistan with night raids, where bad intelligence is fed to settle grudges. So it could be, it could be that the Yemeni government told the U.S. this, and that Obama believed that it was an al-Qaeda training camp. I don't think that Obama is a guy who wakes up in the morning and says, I'd like to go and murder, women and children around the world. I think that he's bought into this idea that what he's doing is actually keeping the country safe. And I think that their own propaganda is that, well, the civilian deaths are really minute. But anytime journalists go to the scene, look at it, the opposite is proven. So I think they're plucking what they want from the narrative and using that to continue with the policy. So I think it was a case of probably the Yemeni government feeding them intelligence that this dangerous person was there and that there was this training camp. And I think that the guy that they intended to kill actually was killed in the strike. But when I investigated who he was, it's sort of insider baseball politics, but the guy was an old mujahideen who had fought in Afghanistan. Yemen had sent more foreign fighters to Afghanistan to fight on the U.S. side against the Soviets than any other Arab nation. And he had been an old school jihadist who had a very loose affiliation with al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So his status then is elevated because he's a nobody from this small village to the kind of epic level of being a leader of al-Qaeda. Most people had never even heard of him in Yemen or within al-Qaeda. He wasn't even middle management. So I think it's possible that it was the Yemeni government responding to pressure from the White House and feeling like no one would ever go there to fact check it. This woman back here is what I was. Can you pass that back to her? I feel like we're the TSA of public events here. We figured out a way to make it as cumbersome as possible.
This is great. I'm an attorney and I represent an imam of a mosque here who was entrapped in an FBI sting operation. And because of that, a whole group formed here because we realized how unfair that was. And we learned that the U.S. government is doing something called preemptive prosecution against Muslims. Just as the signature strikes are preemptive in that they're based on suspicion and no evidence, the U.S. government is going against Muslims in prosecutions in regular domestic courts based on no evidence in sting operations and things like the material support statute in the Holy Land Foundation case. And I was wondering if you were familiar with that case where the way the material support statute is being used.
Yeah, I'm glad that you raised this. There have been so many plots that either seem to have been fabricated, exaggerated, or in some way or another involve the FBI encouraging the plot to move forward. And in some cases, there are people that are struggling with mental illness that are targeted by the FBI and sort of made the scapegoats of these operations, and they plant in their head the idea that they should actually take it a step further than just being angry and actually do something about it. And it's really scandalous. I mean, this should be, instead of the sort of carnival of crazy that goes on Capitol Hill with the hearings these days about certain scandals, this is an utter scandal. And I think if it was happening to another group and it wasn't Muslims, people would be outraged. But Muslims have been so demonized in this society and scapegoated and painted with the broad brush of being terrorists that I think most Americans are probably either don't care or think that the government is right, or are too nervous to speak out about it because it's happening to Muslims and they don't want to be accused of being terrorists. I look at this in the context also of the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. I mean, there are some clauses in that I think are cause for very serious concern about indefinite detention and material support. I mean, look at someone like me. I go to countries, I talk to people that are sworn enemies of the United States. I try to get their perspective. I interview them. What's their view of me? If they put a Yemeni journalist in prison, I'm speaking with them. Am I supporting them by talking to them? I get accused by neoconservative media outlets of being a jihadist myself, or wanting attacks on the United States because I go and talk to people on the other side. So, I mean, this whole climate around this issue is entirely motivated from fear and is just dripping with bigotry and racism against the Muslim community in the United States. I mean, every city that I go to, I meet someone like you, an attorney or someone who comes up and says, have you heard of this case in our community? Whether it's the Fort Dix case, or it's the Lackawanna 6, or all these cases. And Darwish, I didn't want to get into the whole story, but this Kamal Darwish, the guy who was killed in Yemen in 2002, was, they had tried to implicate him as part of the Lackawanna, 6 case. And the point of it is that, we crossed a line in 2001 when only Barbara Lee stood up and opposed the authorization for the use of military force. I mean, can you imagine being the lone member of Congress to stand up and vote against the blank check that Congress gave the Bush administration to wage war on the world? I think everyone should go back and watch Barbara Lee's speech, because she was right in what she was saying, and she was courageous to have done it at that moment in time when there was such nationalistic fervor in the country. But then you had Russ Feingold, the only senator to vote against the USA Patriot Act. And from the sort of collective ceding of the conscience to the will of the mob that seems to happen, whenever we perceive a threat, stem all sorts of abuses, it'll take non-Muslims also standing up in solidarity with Muslims who are being targeted to say we are not going to accept this in our society. And this is how villains get away, is when good people are silent in dark times, and this is a dark time. So, who has the? Can you just pass the mic to, or whoever has it? Whatever. If people can yell, we can just do it that way. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a simple question. When is this country ever going to care about the truth? We don't seem to have our administration caring about the truth and presenting the truth.
Yeah, when's this country going to care about the truth? What is truth, as Pilate said? No, yeah, I mean, truth has sort of been defined in a weird way. I was mentioning reality television, but I actually think that it's part of the culture. I mean, we've been so dumbed down and numbed up by the sort of way that information is presented to us. I mean, I do think that social media is presenting us with a very interesting moment in time, because the elites of the media can't get away with their BS as easily. They get fact-checked in real time by people, and their sort of their monopoly over the process of disseminating information has been kind of shattered by citizen journalism and by everyone sort of being able to pitch in and have a voice. I mean, if you look at why are those corporate media outlets, why do they despise and loathe WikiLeaks so much, including the New York Times, which sold a lot of papers based on the fact that they used WikiLeaks documents? Why is Bill Keller on his private little crusade against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks? Because what WikiLeaks did was to show that the emperor has no clothes. When these are journalists who depend on official leaks all the time to write their big stories about what the U.S. is doing around the world, and they're led into the elite club and shown a tiny little bit of the goblet, and then they win their Pulitzers and they do all this stuff. Well, WikiLeaks puts it all up. Hey, everyone, search what these guys are normally leaked. So all of a sudden, they don't control the monopoly on it. And you've got young kids who are blogging about what the U.S. is doing in Chad or Mali or Somalia. And you have other journalists who are not powerful friends of the Super Soaker Club at Joe Biden's house on the weekends, and don't get to go to the White House Correspondent Stenographer Association dinner and listen to the president make jokes about drone strikes when he won't answer any questions about drone strikes because he's never asked any questions about drone strikes by journalists. All of a sudden, WikiLeaks comes on the scene. They put all this stuff up publicly.
The New York Times felt threatened by that. And, and Bill Keller has waging this crusade, to try to smear everyone involved with that operation. Look at Bradley Manning. This young man is rotting away in prison. Bradley Manning admitted in court. I never would say that Manning was behind the cables because I wanted to hear it from him. I felt like I don't want to be part of the clique that rushes to convict people before they even are charged with a crime. So I've been careful in how I've talked about Bradley Manning, but you should listen, if you haven't before, to the leaked audio from his court-martial where he describes why he took the actions that he took. He is clearly a person of conscience who was deliberate in his thinking about why he did what he did. And they have tried to smear him, and they bring up his gender preference, and they bring up his sexual orientation, and they try to dehumanize him and make him seem like he's a moral degenerate, that he's an unstable individual. But then you listen to him, and oh my God, it's shocking how he sounds. He sounds calm, collected, and principled in what he's saying. But I bring him up because there is almost no coverage of his trial right now. I'm a plaintiff in a lawsuit with Glenn Greenwald and Kevin Gostola and others where we're trying to sue to make those proceedings fully public so that we know what they're charging him with and what the evidence is against him. And we've lost at every turn in this battle. We just filed again today, another one, and we're fighting and fighting because they're trying to keep large portions of those proceedings secret. So, the fact that the New York Times had to be shamed into covering Bradley Manning's trial when they made newspaper sales based on the documents that he had leaked really says a lot about where they're standing. And there are great reporters that work for the New York Times. I'm talking about it institutionally, the position that they've taken on this. Yeah, go ahead and then there. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess before we take Iraq,
Which time?
second time, Joseph Wilson wrote a New York Times op-ed about all the fabricated reasons they were using to attack Iraq, and then his wife, Valerie Plame, was a CIA agent, was outed by the Bush administration. She was deeply involved with sensitive operations with Iraqis who trusted her, and I think Scooter Libby was the one who was indicated to doing that, and he's not in jail. How come somebody who outed a CIA agent, who's an operative, is not getting in jail, but a guy who just leaks embarrassing information is held in solitary confinement for over a year?
I believe Libby did go to jail, actually, in that case. And then there was this pressure on Bush to pardon him, and Cheney was furious that Bush wouldn't pardon Scooter Libby. But I understand your point. I mean, I'll give you maybe a little bit of a better example. There were 5 senior executives of Blackwater that were indicted on conspiracy and weapons charges, and this is the totality of who was held accountable, and they were given 4 months of house arrest. These guys who blow the whistle on these programs from the NSA and CIA have their lives ruined. John Kiriakou is in prison right now, this former CIA operative. But your point is a good one. Obama said we're going to look forward, not backward. And I'm going to say that the next time I get caught speeding or something. Well, officer, we're just got to look forward, not backward. But it shows, the fact that someone like Jose Rodriguez, who ran the torture program, was the architect of the CIA's black site program, can be viewed as an acceptable, legitimate member of society and go on a book tour and be in documentaries and give speeches around the country while whistleblowers are being prosecuted by this administration in a more intense way than any other administration in history. The use of the Espionage Act, Obama has used it twice as many times as any other president in U.S. history combined. There have only been 3 other uses of the Espionage Act. Obama has used it, I think, at least 6 times. And then you have the war on journalists that the Justice Department is waging. The seizure of the Associated Press's phone records. I don't believe that that's just about one story. I think they were going after the entire team at the AP that was doing critical, good reporting on the CIA at a moment when they were expanding the signature strike program. I think they went after them. I think it was politically motivated that they went after them because they had pissed off powerful people. And they wanted to figure out who they were talking to in government. I don't often find myself defending Fox News, and I certainly don't have any love in my heart for them, but I'm against the naming of this reporter, James Rosen, in this indictment. They're criminalizing journalism. There's WikiLeaks and then there's White House leaks, and you have John Brennan and others have just been leaking like sieves to reporters information that they think is going to help promote their propaganda.
almost everything John Brennan said in the aftermath of the bin Laden raid turned out to be false about what happened during that raid. And this White House has spun journalists for 5 straight years by engaging in official leaks while they go after any reporters who try to get things independently verified or try to report on things that whistleblowers are telling them the American people have a right to know or should know. So it's the double standard, and I'm glad that you raised this. The double standard is incredible, and it says a lot about where we're at right now. Yeah. So there's someone in the back and a woman. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank God for Jeremy Scahill.
Can you speak a little louder? Just in the thanking me part. No.
I said, thank God for Jeremy
No.
Scahill.
Okay, I didn't really mean that, but okay.
Fewer and fewer truly investigative journalists, as you just pointed out, and certainly very few of them with your courage. I wanted to ask about what you just mentioned a while ago, which was a blank check that Congress gave to the President after 9/11. Along with Eric Holder came the news that Congress has just passed a permanent blank check for this President and future presidents to declare and carry on the endless war that was talked about. How is it, this is totally anti-constitutional, and I realize that I believe that Congress has not declared war since World War II, if I'm correct, which means it was always against the Constitution that those wars were allowed, including up to the present moment. How is it that this is flying under the radar, that it is not being questioned, and shouldn't the ACLU or somebody have a lawsuit?
Well, yeah, I just want to make sure people understand. You're basically talking about the fact that Congress didn't declare war, and there should be a lawsuit about it from the ACLU or the CCR.
Yeah, but they just now passed a permanent resolution of that nature. So
Right. I just wanted to correct myself on something. Scooter Libby was sentenced to prison, and then Bush commuted it. So he actually never served a day in prison, but his sentence was commuted. Yeah, so you're correct. On that issue, there's under the War Powers Act, the Center for Constitutional Rights has multiple times sued the White House. They did it under Clinton with the bombing of Yugoslavia. They did it with Bush. There was a challenge with Obama also, I believe over Libya. I mean, there has been litigation on that, and they've never successfully won a case. Clinton did the air war in Yugoslavia for 78 days of bombing against the will of the UN, and the Center for Constitutional Rights did try to sue on those grounds. The really dangerous thing right now is if they update and alter what's called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force, the AUMF, that was passed after 9/11, and make it more permanent. If that actually becomes law, then it is a perpetual state of war. And there's very little outcry about this right now. I mean, I hope some people in Congress wake up and address it. Yeah, go ahead.
Any progress at all being made to create accountability for the use of drugs? And what would be your view?
Any process of accountability for any progress to create a process of accountability for the drones? And what would be my